Welcome back. All right, topic of discussion today. I wanted to talk about media pressure. I wanted to talk about media pressure, and it's not just media. It could be fans, sure, just the market. And I wanted to talk about this because since Marner left Toronto and went to Las Vegas, it has been a discussion all summer. I really felt like it would probably quiet down, but there's still a lot of discussion. So I wanted to talk about it myself because something Marner said to Emily Kaplan has definitely caused some more discussion to take place. So Marner found a lack of intense media in Vegas a breath of fresh air. This is what was said by Emily Kaplan on social media in an interview she did with Mitch Marner. And it has been a discussion point with the Toronto Maple Leafs for as long as I have watched hockey. The idea that if you leave Toronto, you leave that fishbowl, you're going somewhere else where you're probably not going to get as much pressure. And so I wanted to organize teams by endless media coverage and various other ways of denoting like coverage and support and all that. And to me, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, Edmonton are the four places where you get the most media coverage, the most scrutiny. And so I understand. I understand why players would look at that when they're free agents and say, I don't know that that's where I'd want to play. The Vancouver Canucks have had struggles finding players that would want to necessarily come and play who are Canadian. The discussion of, Vancouver needs more Canadian players. Sure. Who? Which players are you trading for? And when you get into no trade clauses and you get into no move clauses, there are definitely players who will have Vancouver on the list. They may have Toronto on the list. I don't think Montreal right now would necessarily be on a lot of lists because Montreal right now is a young and up-and-coming team, so there are players who might want to play for Montreal right now who might have said in 2021 or 2022, nah, wouldn't want to go to Montreal. And then for Edmonton, of course, they're contenders. So there's still players that are going to want to play there, but there is endless coverage. Now, I wanted to go with places where it feels like there's strong fan support, and it is related to what was said and what I've seen other people say as well. I don't post a lot on social media, but I do monitor social media to get an idea for where the mood is online and what people are saying. And so I think there's strong fan support in, and it's not strange that these are new locations, but Vegas, Utah, Colorado, Minnesota, and Seattle, I would say those are pretty dedicated fan bases that are, all five of these are locations that I think players are going to want to go to. And Las Vegas stands out. The Vegas Golden Knights, you don't get that same scrutiny. What I've found interesting with Vegas, and I know there's people who don't like Vegas for various reasons, but fan support seems to be kind of unwavering for most. There are certainly some Vegas fans that will complain from game to game about certain players, but in general, the support is there. And it doesn't mean that people don't care. It doesn't mean people don't recognize players. It means that that fan support is there. And I would put Utah, Colorado, Minnesota, Seattle in that category as well at this point. And then if you want to go to a great warm place to play where you may not see snow in the winter, you're looking at Anaheim, LA, San Jose as first examples. And Anaheim and LA, there's part of the reason that we go down to Disneyland in February during the NHL break is because I can hop on a plane here where it's cold, it's snowing. I hop off a plane in Los Angeles or Anaheim. I can go outside in a t-shirt and shorts, and it's 20 degrees Celsius, warmer than right now on the set, which is of course about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, right? And it's great. It's great to get on a plane and you're freezing, and you get off a plane and it's so nice down. So I can see why players would choose that for their family. That they'd say, it's a nice warm location. The weather's great, and we'll talk about that over here. And then I put Florida and Tampa as well. Nashville, Dallas, Carolina as examples of good, warm environments. Now, there are traditional markets that I think things are pretty balanced. And I do have two Canadian teams here of Ottawa and Winnipeg, who I do think get the least amount of coverage of Canadian teams. Is it still intense? Yes, but I don't think it's at that same level. And you got New Jersey, Islanders, Rangers, Chicago, St. Louis, Boston, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Philadelphia, Calgary. Calgary I don't think is as media heavy, and I think right now with what Calgary's going through with the potential rebuild, I know there's three Canadian teams down here, but I don't think Calgary has the same amount of pressure right now. Detroit, Washington, and Columbus, and these can move around, and there are certainly some in this area here. People might say Columbus isn't a traditional market. I would say they've been there 25 years. Cleveland's had teams. Ohio is, I think, a state that could be called a hockey state. So there's that. But I understand why a player might be in that endless media coverage, and so when free agency arrives, they say, no, I'd rather play elsewhere. So why would you choose? Now, the lower taxes gets brought up a lot, sure, but we have seen, and I did a video yesterday on Montreal, there are players right now signing for below market value to stay in Montreal because they want to play in Montreal. And they believe this team has a chance to win. There's a good young core there. So there are definitely arguments for lower taxes, but you can also see players signing for less money. Edmonton, McDavid signs that 2-year extension, could have got a lot more money than he did. He wants a chance to win a cup, and he's put Edmonton on the clock there, right? Less attention and scrutiny is a thing. If you have a young family and you want to go out to dinner and you don't want to have to deal with worrying about being harassed at any kind of restaurant, you can do that if you're in California. You can go out to a restaurant in LA, have a good night, and it might be that nobody in the restaurant recognizes you, right? There are definitely places in almost any big city in the US where you can have that. Whereas in Canada, it might be a little more difficult. And I know there are people who will say, well, they should still want to play because, they should embrace that pressure. Not everybody plays really well under that pressure. I think Marner admitting that he didn't play as well under that pressure, I don't think that makes him weak because there are other players who don't want to come up to Canada. For instance, Joe Sakic, Burnaby Joe, right? There was always the discussion of, hey, someday, some point, maybe he'll sign in Vancouver. I remember Canuck fans being excited anytime his contract was up. And yet, it was obvious he didn't want to come and play in Vancouver. And the scrutiny was likely a big part of it. And there's probably other parts of it as well. You have to look at the franchise, then the amount of consistency, and, are they contenders? Are they usually contenders? Is it kind of a crazy organization where things can change from day to day? And so I understood why players from British Columbia, when they turn pro, wouldn't necessarily be like, I want to play for the Canucks. I want to, play for my home team. There are exceptions. There are players who do want to play in Vancouver. There are players who have wanted to play for the home team. And I embrace the idea that there are players who want that scrutiny and they want that pressure and they welcome it. But I do understand the ones that don't. It's like I was talking about with the video yesterday on on the Canadians. I do not dislike a player for taking market value or for getting the most money that he feels he can in his contract. But I also appreciate when a player takes below market value to stay with an organization. I can see both arguments because your NHL career is as long as 18, 19 years maybe, but you're an injury away from it being over. And so I get why players would want all that money. I also understand why players would say, I'll take less to stay where I am. The anonymity in public, I think, is a point worth repeating here. I think that's something that could be important to a lot of players. Not necessarily all. There are definitely players who enjoy the attention. Going back to Vancouver, not only have the Sedins stayed in Vancouver after their careers are done, they're very visible in the community, and I've never heard of them being negative towards any fans walking up to them and asking for a selfie or anything like that. I've never heard anything negative about either of the Sedin twins at all. Now, there's other reasons, and I put those in blue. There's a chance to play more. You might sign as a free agent with a team because you have a chance to play, whereas you didn't have a chance to play on the other team, or less of a chance to play, right? Maybe you have a chance to play with a big star player. You have a chance to play with Crosby or Ovechkin, a legend. You grew up watching them and you have a chance to play with them. Maybe you can have a chance to be on their line. That's huge, right? And it might be a coach situation where maybe your favorite coach is somewhere that you feel like, all right, you're going to go there. For instance, with the Rangers, there are a few players there who Mike Sullivan is familiar with from Pittsburgh. There's definitely that helps, right? You don't have to go through the process of that player learning your system. He already knows your system. He already knows how you work. And so it just makes things a little bit smoother. That transition's a little bit easier. The opportunity to play, as I said, with a legend, team identity and loyalty. And so when you look at teams, ask yourself, if your team has lost a player, what is their identity? What direction are they headed in? Do you realistically believe they're winning a Stanley Cup over the next 3 to 5 years? Because if your answer is, I don't know if they're going to win or not, then a player deciding he wants to go somewhere else for that chance to win a Stanley Cup shouldn't be reviled. I have always pointed the finger towards the franchise that loses the player, which is like, okay, so If we're upset that that player's going to leave because he feels he has a better chance to win somewhere else, shouldn't we be pointing the finger at management because they didn't put that team together that made that player feel like they should be able to stay? This is the Vancouver argument I've been making lately. Of hey, if you're worried about losing a high-profile player, then maybe the pressure should be on management to do what they can. As I said in that video as well, though, I'd rather not see an organization doing things that are going to hurt the long-term viability of that team's cup chances just for the sake of one player. And so there's that balancing act there. In some cases, you have to sacrifice that big name player for the betterment of your franchise as the long-term future would dictate. And I can definitely do videos on players who were traded when they were young that it worked out pretty well for a team rather than them, doing everything they can to hold on to said player. The warm winters, I think, are important. And I know there's people who will shrug at that and say, nah, it's not important. If it's snowing, who cares? But for these players who are on the road a lot, you want to make sure that if you're married and you got kids, that your wife and kids are happy and that things are going well. Because when we talk about players who are in slumps and everything, there are definitely instances where a player's in a slump because they've had a parent recently pass, which we as fans never get mad at them for. But if a player is maybe distracted at certain points in time because of other things that are going on off the ice, I don't think we should be calling them weak either, because that's life. That's how it works. That's how things happen. So it is a very difficult position that I think players sometimes are in. Do I stay in this location where things are kind of crazy and I want to show my loyalty, but playing in that environment seems a little more attractive to me? And there are players who choose to come up and play in Canada and stay because they know that there's the tradition. They feel they have a chance to win. Like the asterisks that I have on the board are the ones that have teams that have the highest cup odds. So Edmonton is the one with the endless media coverage that has the high cup odds because they've been in the final twice in the last 2 years. And then you've got Vegas and Colorado here under the ones that I think have the really strong fan support. The warm places to play, there's Dallas, Carolina, and Florida. So, yeah, that's your top 6 right there. And I definitely think it's something that helps. For everybody who's mad at Florida, I think the reality is that now you've got good management combined with all the other advantages. So Florida, before they were Stanley Cup champions, a lot of players went down there later in their career for the last 2 or 3 years before retirement. And it used to be a running joke that was kind of the retirement home. So-and-so signs, 2-year deal with the Panthers. Well, of course, he's 36, his career's almost done. He's been through a lot of injuries. He'll go down to Florida. He might not play a lot, but, and now that's changed. So everybody gets mad because they do have an advantage when it comes to the taxes. But they also have all the other advantages as well, including being back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. And so without that endless media scrutiny, you're not going to have that in Sunrise, Florida. You're not going to have that in Miami. I would argue you probably don't have that in Tampa either. I haven't seen that. I've never heard of that with Tampa Bay Lightning players, and they have 3 Stanley Cups going back to 2004, right? So there's definitely that argument. I have talked about it before with Canadian teams. I feel like with the amount of pressure the media puts on Canadian teams, they can't really necessarily make moves that other teams might. Some of the teams that don't have the same amount of scrutiny. There may not be the patience for a rebuild in a Canadian traditional market that you might have in other locations. I'm saying might because there are definitely situations where if Toronto ever goes into a rebuild, you're still going to fill that building. Toronto fans will always fill that building. Same with Montreal. Montreal, always a full building, but there are others that might not be quite as full. I know with Vancouver, there have been times where their attendance fluctuates, drops off because they're just not very good. And then you get into the discussion of ticket prices and everything as well, and that's valid. But for some of those other markets, it's easier to entice players to come and play, and maybe you don't have to worry about going into a long-term rebuild necessarily because you're always going to have those other built-in advantages. As the salary cap skyrockets, it does make it easier for teams to hold on to homegrown talent and those players that they've built their identity around. But it does make it difficult to entice free agents unless you're willing to pay more. And so this is where things can kind of morph as well. Maybe I can sign a player if I'm Bill Zito for $9 million, who, if I'm in, say, Minnesota or I'm in Vancouver, it might cost me 13 or 14 million for a cap hit. Just as an example, right? And then fans will get mad. Well, why did you sign that guy for that amount of money? Because I'm trying to entice him to come and play somewhere rather than Florida, rather than Las Vegas, where they know they're going to have all those other advantages. So I have to make it worth their while. I kind of feel for general managers in that position. It is something that I think needs to be taken into consideration when some of these contracts get signed, and people automatically are just mad about the cap hit and not understanding that sometimes it takes a higher cap hit to keep a player around. And that is probably going to be more and more of a thing going forward. As the salary cap goes up and up and up, we will probably see teams in advantageous positions because they're already contenders. They've already got everybody buying into what they're selling. They're in a nice, warm market. There's not as much pressure as there is in the other markets. And then you're going to have that separation, right? So we'll see how all of this ends up playing out. As I said yesterday, a lot of players definitely signed with Montreal for what is right now looking like discount contracts. So maybe other teams can figure that out as well. But there is no one blueprint. We always see that of everybody should copy this team, but there is no one blueprint because every team is in a unique situation. Even putting this together, I decided to stop at four different headers. And the traditional market pretty balanced was basically my cop-out of, I'm just going to put this here because then there's various other ways I could put them together, but people are going to get upset and mad. I already know there's going to be people saying I've got teams in the wrong spot at this point, especially the strong fan support, just putting that as like the header. And it's partly because I've been to Las Vegas multiple times and I've seen it. There's Vegas Golden Knights merch everywhere. Everybody wears Vegas Golden Knights everything. And yet it's not a critical, it's not one that people are like, oh man, they suck. There are people who might say that, but it's fewer. And I know too that people will say, well, that's because Vegas hasn't had a bad team to this point. You just wait until they're a bad team. And yet there are good teams that get criticized a lot. So there's definitely that as well. It is something that I think general managers are going to have to continue to be creative in certain markets in order to field a Stanley Cup contender on the ice with talent under the same salary structure as other teams when they've got those advantages. So LTIR, that loophole got closed this year, which seems to make most people happy, but there are still advantages that certain locations have that aren't going away. And so LTIR is one thing. It's fine. It's out there. It's done. But there are definitely advantages that other locations have. So let me know your thoughts. If you were a free agent, it's July the 1st, which teams would you be the first to answer the phone for? And which ones would you say, I'm just going to let that phone ring. I'm not too sure that that's necessarily where I want to play. If nobody else calls, I'll answer that call, but I'd rather go somewhere else. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. The one thing that I would say is that if you're a fan of a player and they snub your organization to go sign somewhere else, I don't know that hating and being angry on the player is necessarily something that helps. I think when fans react that way, that player is probably saying, wow, I made the right call there, didn't I? I don't think Marner's looking at some of the reaction online and going, I should have stayed in Toronto. Look at the way these people hate me. I should have stayed there. So he's just the latest. There will be others. There have been others. And it will be a discussion point in hockey for probably forever. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.